You want to build the richest empire in human history. No printing press, no central bank, no paper money anyone has to trust, just land, silver, and gold. And for 200 years, you pull it off. You end up controlling more wealth than any empire before you, richer at your peak than every kingdom in Western Europe combined. That's not an exaggeration, that's the Mughal Empire. Most people picture the Taj Mahal, peacock thrones, diamonds the size of eggs, emperors draped in silk, and they assume the wealth came first, that all that glory was just what rich people do with money they already had. It wasn't. The Mughals didn't build monuments because they were rich. They became rich because they solved a problem that had broken almost every agrarian empire before them. How do you pull maximum revenue out of hundreds of millions of acres of farmland without destroying the farmers who work it? Get that wrong, and your economy collapses in a generation. The Mughals got it right for 200 years. Today we're breaking down exactly how, the mechanics, the hidden costs, and the fatal flaw that was built into the system from day one, waiting to go off. Start with the land, because in Mughal India, land was the economy. By the late 1500s, under the Emperor Akbar, the empire controlled some of the most fertile river plains on earth, the Indus, the Ganges, the Yamuna, feeding a population of over 100 million people. That's more people than lived in all of Europe at the time. And unlike Egypt, this wasn't one river on one flood cycle. This was wheat and barley in the north, rice in the Bengal delta, cotton across the Deccan, multiple crops, multiple harvests, multiple revenue streams running at once across a landmass the size of a continent. A bad drought in Gujarat didn't sink the treasury because Bengal's rice was still coming in. The empire wasn't betting on one river. It was running a portfolio. But fertile land means nothing if you can't collect from it efficiently. And before the Mughals fixed this, tax collection across Indian kingdoms was chaos, arbitrary assessments, corrupt local collectors, a different rate in every province depending on who was squeezing you that year. Akbar's finance minister, a man named Raja Todar Mal, ended that chaos with a system that sounds almost boring until you realize how radical it was for the 1580s. Land was measured. Crop yields were tracked over a rolling 10-year average, region by region. Prices were standardized. And from that data, the state set a fixed cash tax, roughly a third of the average yield, paid in silver, not in grain. Picture a farmer in Punjab. Under the old system, a corrupt local official could show up and demand whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Under Todar Mal's system, that farmer knew exactly what he owed, and so did the empire, before the harvest even came in. That's the part almost nobody talks about. 300 years before industrialization, the Mughal state was running one of the most data-driven bureaucracies on earth. Not guessing, measuring. And that single change did something bigger than fix corruption. Because the tax was paid in silver, not crops, farmers now had to sell their surplus grain in local markets just to raise the cash. Which meant markets had to exist. Which meant traders, moneylenders, and grain merchants sprang up in every district to service that demand. The tax system didn't just extract wealth from the countryside, it manufactured a functioning cash economy across an entire subcontinent that had run largely on barter. Now, who actually managed all that land day to day? This is where the system gets clever, and where the time bomb gets built in without anyone noticing. The emperor technically owned all land, but on the ground it ran through a system called mansabdari. Nobles, mansabdars, were ranked by number, and that number told you how many cavalry and infantry they had to supply the imperial army. In return, most of them weren't paid in cash. They were handed a jagir, temporary rights to collect tax revenue from a specific piece of land. Here's the key detail. Jagirs weren't hereditary. They rotated. A noble running a rich province this year could be reassigned somewhere else next year, with no warning and no say in it. Think about what that does to incentives. If you knew you'd be moved off your land in 12 months, would you build irrigation for the farmer who'll benefit 5 years from now? Or would you squeeze every rupee you could out of the current harvest, because next year it's someone else's problem? Every mansabdar chose the second option. That was the design. A noble with no permanent territory has no personal power base to build an army against the emperor with. It's one of the most effective anti-feudalism mechanisms ever engineered. It worked brilliantly, right up until it didn't. Let's talk about the money, because this is where Mughal India goes from wealthy regional power to wealthiest place on the planet. The empire ran on real currency, the silver rupee and the gold mohur, minted to a strict standard and policed hard against counterfeiting. And after Spain started hauling silver out of the Americas by the shipload, an enormous share of that global silver supply ended up in India. Why? Because India ran a massive, sustained trade surplus with the rest of the world. Indian cotton and silk, especially out of Bengal and Gujarat, were the most desired manufactured goods on earth. Europeans wanted it. Ottomans wanted it. Southeast Asian traders wanted it. And India wanted almost nothing back in return, so everyone paid in silver, and that silver stayed. Here's the number that should stop you. At its peak under Aurangzeb in the late 1600s, the Mughal Empire is estimated to have commanded roughly a quarter of total global economic output. A quarter, bigger than all of Western Europe combined. This wasn't some poor, exotic backwater famous for spices and elephants. This was the financial and manufacturing center of the early modern world, and Europe ran a trade deficit against it for 200 straight years, before that equation ever flipped. So how does the wealthiest empire on earth collapse from the inside? The Jagier system. The same mechanism that kept nobles loyal and mobile also had an expiration date built into it, and nobody saw it coming until it was already too late. As Aurangzeb pushed the empire's borders deeper into the Deccan Plateau through decades of near-constant warfare, he needed more nobles to command more troops. But the number of mensabdars needing Jagier assignments grew faster than the amount of productive, taxable land available to hand out. Too many nobles, not enough land. Historians call this the Jagirdari crisis. Jagirs shrank, rotations sped up, faster and messier, as the administration scrambled to keep every noble satisfied. And a Jagirdar who might hold his assignment for a single year now had even less reason to think long-term. He squeezed the peasantry as hard as he could, as fast as he could, because there was no future harvest he'd ever see the benefit of. The exact mechanism that had once prevented feudal entrenchment now was actively incentivizing short-term extraction the land couldn't sustain. And on top of that, layer in the war itself. Aurangzeb's Deccan campaigns dragged on for decades and drained the treasury at a pace the tax system was never built for. Remember, this system was designed for administrative predictability, not for funding an endless war. To close the gap, provincial officials started raising assessments above the historical Dasila averages. That broke the one thing that had made the entire system legitimate in the eyes of the people paying into it: fairness based on real, measured data. Peasants revolted, the Jats near Agra, the Satnami uprising, and in the Deccan, the Marathas took the fiscal cracks and used them to build an independent revenue base of their own, eventually carving out a rival power structure inside what was supposed to be Mughal territory. The empire wasn't toppled by one dramatic invasion. It was hollowed out from the inside by a tax base being asked to fund a war it could no longer afford, administered by nobles who had every short-term reason to make it worse. By the time Aurangzeb died in 1707, the empire controlled more land than ever on a map, and was already broke underneath it. Provincial governors started quietly withholding revenue from Delhi while still swearing loyalty to the throne. Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad. Within decades, all of them were running their own treasuries in everything but name. The same mobility that once stopped any noble from putting down roots now meant there was no regional elite left who actually had a stake in saving the empire when it started to fall. And into that vacuum stepped a private trading corporation. The English East India Company didn't invent a new system to extract Bengal's wealth. It just took over the exact administrative machinery Akbar's ministers had built 2 centuries earlier: measurement, standardized assessment, silver-based collection, and redirected the output, not to Delhi, not to Indian infrastructure, to shareholders in London. So here's the actual lesson, and it's not about gold or silk or the Taj Mahal. The Mughal Empire's real achievement was a data-driven bureaucracy that turned a fractured patchwork of regional kingdoms into the wealthiest, most fiscally coherent state on earth, built on measurement, standardization, and a nobility deliberately kept mobile so it could never entrench. That exact design, mobility over roots, extraction over investment, was brilliant for a century and a half, and it was fatal the moment it collided with a war it couldn't afford. A system built to prevent one kind of collapse quietly manufactured a completely different one. The empire that commanded a quarter of the world's wealth didn't fall to a foreign army. It fell because the men running the money had no reason left to care whether it survived past their own turn holding it. So here's the question worth sitting with. Is that actually a story about the 1700s? Or is it just what happens every single time when the people managing a system get rewarded for extraction and rotated out before they ever have to face the consequences?